Good afternoon, thank you for joining us and welcome to today's Just2easy webinar, thinking about how our tools can help you in your teaching of mathematics and numeracy. My name's Charlie White and I'm one of the educational consultants here at Just2easy. A little bit of background about me just for context before we start. I trained to teach in 2012. I worked for a few years in a mainstream primary school before moving to a school for children with social, emotional, mental health needs. And I did a few years of supply after that across the primary age range before I had my daughter and I came to start doing various bits and pieces for J2E. And then when Nikki Kimball, for those of you who met her, went off on her maternity leave, I took over some of her roles, including these webinars that we're really proud to present with C2K. Just for a little bit of session housekeeping, we're scheduled for a 4:30 finish today. It should be a roughly 40-minute webinar with a bit of time for questions at the end. You are all muted today, that's your video and your sound, but that doesn't mean that we don't want you to ask questions. Questions can be asked via the chat throughout. I won't be monitoring my chat, but we do have a couple of people in the background who are more than able to answer your questions. So we have Danny Young, our Managing Director, and Sophie, who's our Office Manager. And that's Sophie that you'll get if you direct message Just2easy support. So please do ask questions as you go through if you think of any. And then, as I said at the end, you'll be able to unmute and ask any questions that you might have left. Today's session is going to be recorded. I'm going to go through at quite a pace to get through as much as I can within the time. So please do feel free, give us a couple of days to get it uploaded, but to go back through and work through any of the activities that you like at your own pace, or to share with a colleague who might be interested, or if for any reason you need to dash off, you'll be able to catch up, and that will be here. So for context, there's a couple of J2E websites. We have j2e.com, which is one of the places you can access the tools. And we have just2easy.com, which is kind of the main company website, so you can find lots of information on there. And if you go to just2easy.com, click on the news tab, and then look for this tile here, you can view previous webinars. So that will be this one in a couple of days' time. And all of the other webinars that have happened, the introductory webinars, the language and literacy, and the world around us, they're all up there. But you can also book on to future webinars. So if you enjoy today, we still have a couple left in this series, and please do go and have a look and get yourself booked on, or recommend to a colleague if you think they would be interested in that. We'd love to have you at those, and they're both before Christmas. Now, before I start today's webinar, just a couple of news announcements to let you know about. A couple of updated features within J2E. The first is one that we've been teasing for a while, and that is our speech to text function. And that is now here and to be found in J2E 5. We're really excited to share this with you. We think you'll find it really useful. It's just another feature in our accessibility tools. So if I just click here, so within J2E 5, in the typing toolbar at the right-hand side, you'll see this new little icon here. And if I click on this, it will prompt me to click on the microphone and begin speaking, so I can say, this is speech to text. And if I click add text, that will add that to the page and will now work in the same way as if I'd typed it. So I can now do anything with that I could do with typed text. So this is really great for those children you might have who might just need a little bit of extra support with their writing, and just to make sure that all children can access these tools. And the other one is a little added feature within the visual program in J2 Code, and that is the ability to add sounds. I've shown you with this arrow where that is within visual, but it will allow you to make little tunes to add to your coding, and there's some other sounds in there too. And just to give you an example of the kind of thing that can be done. So there's a little example for you, but just a couple of other things for you to have a play with there that you might not have seen before. But on with today's session. So I've split the session today into three key areas really within the maths curriculum that I think the tools can really help you with. So we're going to look at measures, shape and space, and data handling. A few other ideas at the end that don't quite fit into those categories. And then as usual, I will show you where to access further support, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So without further ado, we'll start by looking at measure. And we have a really lovely tool within J2E for measuring. It's called J2 Measure. Now, J2 Measure has its own tile on the launch pad. It's here. But what that does if you click on it is it takes you into J2E5 and it just loads up that tool already. I can equally just access this from J2E5. I click on the purple tool in the top toolbar. And we have three tools for measuring. We have a ruler, a protractor, and a compass. They can all be resized. They can be rotated. And the compass can be opened. Oh, excuse me, computers. There we go, playing ball. And we can draw some circles. I'm going to start by having a look at the ruler to show you how I would use these tools. And for me, where this will be really useful is that I always found as a teacher, demonstrating how to measure can be really tricky because you want to show the children with the tools that they're using, but obviously they're a certain size, and if you're showing a whole class, you can't really get into reading a ruler properly. And this really helps with that because we can make our ruler into a 30cm ruler. And we have some features. I'll just have to move this up. Wait 1 second. The toolbar along the bottom allows us to edit some things about the page that will help us to use this. So we can turn the page to landscape. If our children are working on a piece of paper that's bigger than A4, we can change that. And we can now show our children how to use a ruler really accurately. So we can draw a line and we can move the ruler to where it needs to be. We can get our children to tell us what we need to do. So we need to start by lining it up at 0. We need to make sure that it's nice and straight going all the way along the line. And when we're ready to read that measurement, again at the bottom, we can zoom in and we can really give our children a great opportunity, just come down, if this was displayed on the whiteboard, to read not just the centimetres, but the little millimetre lines as well, and really demonstrate how to read a ruler or a protractor or whatever it is we're teaching really accurately. So that for me is the main way I would have been using that in the classroom. To kind of follow on with that, from that with a bit of an activity, once the children have had chance to then go and practice with their rulers or whatever it is they're learning, what I used to like to do is to get children to write a success criteria for using that measuring tool. So for using a ruler in this instance, a set of rules, if you like. And this is really great, not just for when they're originally learning to use that measuring tool. So I guess children would learn to use a ruler quite early on, but when children are a bit older, I always used to find that they can just about use a ruler, but maybe they don't quite hold it still, or maybe they forget to keep the 0 lined up. And if we want to really reiterate to make sure they're really accurate with their measuring, getting them to write a success criteria can be really helpful. And what I've done is create a bit of a J2E version, a bit of a twist on this. If I go to my load open folder button at the top, and I'm going to get my children to make a display. And so this is what I was suggesting. So I've done this, but your children could very easily do this, just to write out step by step all the nitty-gritty details about how to use a ruler. Again, this could equally be done with a protractor or any area of maths really. We've just typed, we've changed the background, which is down here. We've put in this picture of a ruler, and these could go on a display. But to make this a little bit more interactive and interesting, I've added a QR code element. Now, if you have a device with you that you aren't using to view the webinar, I'd invite you to have a scan of that QR code. And what you should come to is a video. Now, this is a video of me, but the idea would be your children could do these. And this is a video that your children could create using iPads or cameras, whatever you've got in the classroom, of them demonstrating how to use this tool, how to use a ruler to measure. And then we can turn that video into a QR code so that if this was displayed around the school, anybody could scan that and not just see what they've written, but also watch their visual demonstration. And this is how we would do that. You would take that video that the children had recorded and you'd get it up onto the computer. You'd come into your Launchpad and into My Files, and we need to drag that video content into J2E. Now this is a different video just to show you what I'm doing. I can just drag that here where it says drop files. I'll give it a minute to upload. And this is now going to be saved into my files. And what I can do is click on this little green eye and click where it says QR code. And this will generate a QR code that links to that video. What I need to do is click here where it says publish, and that will allow anybody to view that file who scans that. Now, obviously, you just need to be a little bit aware about children in your class that may or may not have permission for that. But we'll click publish, assuming that that's all okay. We'll then click on this little picture of a floppy disk, which will save this QR code as an image to my files. There it is. If I come back to this page, oh, not that one, this one, because it's in my files, it will now be in my picture library, which is this green portrait button in the top toolbar. There it is, and I could drag that onto my page. If my children have done that, they can click on this red save button in the top toolbar. When children save work, it appears both in their My Files and in the pupils files section of my Files as their teacher. So I can see the work they've done, I can print that off, and I can make a lovely, really interactive display that way. The last thing I'm going to show you within Measure is that obviously as a teacher, I can use those tools, but children can use those tools too. That's really useful if you want to set them a measuring worksheet, whether that's classwork or homework, you can do that, and they can use those tools to complete it. So I'm going to show you an example, and to create this worksheet, I'm going to use the J2 PDF tool. This is a really lovely tool which allows you to turn your PDF document, those flat resources that you've maybe had for years and printed off, or wherever you like to get your resources from, if you just want a really quick resource that's already been made online, you can take those PDF resources and turn them into something your children can use. You can drag them straight off your desktop, or if they're already in your My Files, you can just click Open PDF. Now I've got this one here, Olympic angles. It's a measuring worksheet. So I'm going to click on that. When I click Add, what's going to happen is it's going to stitch that worksheet as a background to a J2E5 file. So this is now a J2E5 file, and we can do anything to that we could do in J2E5. I can add that measuring tool, so they're going to want a protractor here, to the page before I share it with my children. I don't have to, they can add it for themselves, but perhaps at the beginning when they're learning to use these tools, that might be a useful thing to do. I can save this. And I'm now going to click, and that's done, on these two little purple people in the top toolbar, and that's my sharing button. So I can share this with my class. If I take you now to my demo pupil, Harley, he will now find that in his My Files, in the shared files section. There's that piece of work. He can use the protractor to measure some of those angles. He can spin it round, he could line it up, he could resize that if he wants to make it a bit easier to read. And when he's measured his angles, he can write that angle onto the page as well. And when he's done the work, he can then save it. That will not save over what I've done, it will save a copy with his edits on there. And again, in the same places in his My Files and in the pupils file section of my Files as his teacher. Now. Okay, and we're going to move on. I have to move this toolbar back. I'm going to move on to shape and space. And I'm going to start with an activity here that I have created for youngest children with J2 Whiteboard. Now, J2 Whiteboard is like a bit of a cross between J2E5 and an interactive whiteboard program. So it does most things that J2E5 can do, but some things are in a slightly different place. For instance, we find our pictures in this media button on the right-hand side. So if I come to this open folder button, load button again, I can load up this shape sorter that I've created. Now, all I've done is I've got images of different shapes from this media toolbar at the side. And I'm going to ask my children to sort them by how many sides they have. Now, there's a couple of ways I could do that. It might be that I do that as a class activity all together on the carpet, in which case I might ask my children to come up with what the different categories might be. So we might have 3 sides. If I wanted to do it as, say, a free flow activity, I might have already typed these in. And then I don't need to change anything. My children can just click and drag these because it's in J2 Whiteboard, and they can move those shapes to where they want to put them. With it being a whiteboard activity, I can save that. I don't need to share it because I'll just display that on the whiteboard. I'm going to move on to thinking about creating patterns with our shapes. This activity I've created in J2E5 about repeating patterns. What I've done here is I've put some shapes on the page. Again, I found them in the picture library, which is up here in the top toolbar. And I want my children to be able to continue that pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on each shape. I've already done the red square. Start with the triangle, and I'm going to come to the details button in the bottom right hand corner. It looks like 4 arrows pointing in opposite directions. This is a really great button. I'm going to come back to using these functions quite a bit today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the button that says copies. Now what that means is when I go into view mode in a minute, my children will be able to click on that shape and make copies of it. I can do movable, which would just allow them to drag in view mode. Also got a lovely function to turn a picture into a trash can, which I'll show you later. So if I do that there with the blue circle as well, if I come into view mode now, my children can continue this pattern by just dragging those shapes along, and it will make infinite copies. They could save this work by going into edit mode and saving. But if I just wanted them to play, they could just play in view mode. Made a slightly harder one for older children here. And I've put all of the different orientations of the shape in the top right hand corner, so that not only can they continue the shape, this pattern, sorry, but they could also make their own patterns as well. And I could challenge them to make a different repeating pattern, and they could do whatever they wanted that way. And I've created one more pattern. This is for older learners, because I really want them to have a think about what my pattern is first of all. And I'd hope that with a bit of thought, they might realise that we have our shapes are getting 1 extra side as they go along. We've got 3-sided, 4-sided, 5-sided. So to continue this shape pattern, they're going to need to go into edit mode. And again, they'll come into their picture library to find a 6-sided shape. Now you can see I've done this activity a bit because I've got one here. They could also do a safe web search there to find the shape that they were after and simply drag it onto the page. It's a bit of work in repeating patterns there. Now. Okay, and the last thing we're going to look at in shape is going to be using J2 code. Now, I'm aware that probably like me, a lot of you as teachers might not feel so confident in coding, and I'm hopefully just going to give you a bit of a starting point for this to get your children started, and we're going to look at coding polygons today. Now, I'm going to come up to my demo people for this because we can find J2 code on our Launchpad. And it's this tile here. Now, I'm going to start with logo. And for coding polygons in logo, we have 3 different levels in logo, but for coding polygons, we're going to want to go for level 3 because that allows us to see these commands on the left and to have our script area as well. I'll just introduce this to my children. I'll show them we've got some buttons that will make the little arrow draw different things. And then when I've introduced that, I'm going to tell them that using just 2 of those buttons, forward and right, that they can draw a square. And that's probably all I'd say to them. And I'd let them have a play and work out how to draw a square. So I'm going to assume they're going to get it wrong the first time. They might just do forward 50, right 90, and they press play down here. Okay, that's not worked. So they might realise, okay, well, maybe I need to add another forward. There's a little erase button in both the staging area and the script area as well, so they can get rid of that and they can try that again now. Okay, then they might start to think, okay, well, my square needs 4 sides, and eventually they would probably get to a point where they were able to 1, 2, 3, 4 draw a square, and then they can play around with other things. They could think about how to draw a larger square, but we'd need to make it go forward more. We can just change that here. We can think about adding a colour if we wanted to, and we'd need to talk about how we'd need to change the colour before we do the commands, otherwise it won't do the commands in that colour. When they've had a bit of a play and a bit of an explore, I'm going to then start introducing the repeat button and showing my children that because they've actually just written the same thing 4 times over, what they could do is get rid of most of that. Start off by repeat 4, because it's a square, it's a 4-sided shape. And then in the brackets, they would put the command that they want to repeat. And I will show them that that would have exactly the same effect, but it's quicker, right? Beyond that, I'm going to ask them to start thinking about how they could create shapes with more sides and get them to have a play around with that. What might they need to change? Well, there's 3 different things they could change there. They might realise straight away that actually they'd need to make it a bigger repeat. So let's go for a pentagon. And then they might have a go at that. Actually, that's just a square with 2 sides on that side. So then they might think about changing forward 100. Okay, so that's just made a bigger square. And eventually they might start to realise, well, actually what I need to do is change this angle bit, the right bit, and make the angle a bit different. And I guess a lot of children might assume, first of all, they'd want to make the angle bigger because everything else has been bigger. And they'll try this and they'll play with it, and eventually they'll start to work out what they need to draw a pentagon and some other shapes. Oh, it's behind my bar. And they'll keep playing, and they'll get there and they'll get their pentagon. And then what I'm going to do to scaffold their learning with this is I've created a really simple table in J2E5. I can find it just here actually. Let's go straight into J2E5. I've created a table for them to record their findings as they're playing around. I'm going to save this and share it with my children, so as they are finding their shapes, they can put the data into there, so they can start to spot patterns, and they might start to realise first of all that the angle is going to get smaller the more sides that the shape's got. And then I might start to point them in the direction of looking at, well, actually, the relationship between how many sides a shape has and the angle, and that if we multiply those together, we get 360. Because when we've learned that, if we come back to here, where was it in my demo people? We can show our children that actually we don't need to know the angle. We can ask the computer to work it out for us. And we can ask the computer to work it out for us by saying, okay, well, I want you to turn right 360 divided by 5 sides, and that will draw our shape for us. So we can really encourage the children to discover this for themselves with a few pointers along the way. We can do things like creating patterns with this once we've done it. So if I do a little turn after that, and then pop this there again, we'll start to make a bit of a pattern, and we could go around and continue with that. I won't go into much more depth with that today, but there's a lot there that you can get your children to play with. What I will say is that you could also do this within J2 Visual. So got a nice festive reindeer here. This one is really great for children who maybe haven't done coding as much, because we've got blocks here, so we can say, let's do pen down first of all. And I'm going repeat. We've got these buttons here for us. So it can just look a little bit easier for children who maybe don't have as much experience, but our reindeer should now draw our square for us. So we've got two different options for looking at drawing polygons with code in there. And we're going to move on now to data handling. Now, there are some really lovely tools within J2E for data handling. And they are within J2 data, although some of them are also within JIT. So we will go here to J2 data, and we'll start with database. Now, I've looked at database in a few of the webinars before, and I've looked at creating databases as an activity for your children to add data to. So I'm not going to go through that again today, but you can do that. And there's lots of lovely activities to be had by defining your form and getting children to enter data. But there are some lovely example databases that are already in J2E for you to use. So if I click on examples here, the really popular one is the Titanic passenger list. It is fascinating, and there's some really great work to be done with looking at who the different passengers were there. But we're going to look at this country database today. So you can see this is already populated with some data. Just go to some of these tabs. And what I'm going to ask my children to do is look at this, and I'm going to give them some questions and some investigations that are using this data. So some things I might ask them to do. We can see that we know how many people live in each of those countries, but can they work out how densely populated those countries are, thinking about the area, thinking about how many people, how busy it is and how many people actually live in a given area. So I might put my children into groups, maybe mixed ability groups, and get them to see if they can get to a point of realizing that they can, using some division, they can work out how densely populated a country is. They can get a bit of a comparison going between the countries there. We could look at the flags here and look and investigate the different shapes and the number of lines and things like that within the flags. I might ask my children to work out which language is the most commonly spoken in this list of countries. A really nice way for them to do that is to come into the chart function. This allows us to use our database to draw a chart. Really great if you've created your database with information from your children. But here, I could choose a pie chart, and I could make X language, and I can really, really easily, quickly and easily see that German and Spanish are the most commonly spoken languages in that particular set of data. So some really, really nice learning to be done in database. The other two really great data handling tools that we have are Pictogram and Chart, and these are within JIT. So if I click on Pictogram, you can see Pictogram is our red tab within JIT, and Chart is our orange tab. So JIT is our Just2easy infant toolkit, although it does have a lot of uses for older learners too. Pictogram is really self-explanatory. We can create pictograms, so there are a number of set templates. If I click on one, the pictures will populate into the boxes at the bottom. Children can add those onto the pictogram to show the data that they found. That can be edited. Or equally, if I do the blank one, children can take pictures from the picture library to set up their own pictogram. But the one we're going to look at in a little bit more detail is Chart. Chart allows us and children to take data, to put data into this table, and for it to be reflected in a chart of their choosing or charts of their choosing. Now, children can go straight into this themselves. If they're really confident with this, they can just open up JIT, open up Chart, and record their investigation and their findings in here. I can also set one up as a teacher for my children to get them started. So for instance, if we were looking at really standard investigation about the effect of exercise on pulse rate, I'm doing that with my children. So I might set this up for all or some of my children so that they're ready to just put their data in. So I want pulse rate to go up the side. So I'll pop that in there. When measured along the bottom, excuse my spelling. I could even put some of those timings in for them. So before exercise, you can see I've done this before. After 2 minutes exercise, 4 minutes. So just for some of my children who might need a little bit more scaffolding of their learning, you can set this up for them and share it with them. Now it's not come along the bottom because I've not put any data in yet. It will. I can now set that, save that. I'll give it a name just at the top here. Excuse my typing. I can click on this orange circle with the floppy disk in to save. When I share with my children in JIT, I just need to do that from my files. There is that that file for them to fill in. So I'll go on the I. I'll share that with my children, just like I did before. And if I come back to my demo people, he can now find that in his shared files. And he can start to put in his data. So he can say, oh, before exercise it was 91. And you can see that automatically goes into the graph. And he could And then what I really like about this is we can have some really interesting conversations with our children about which chart or graph is best suited for the data they've got. So here we've got data over time, so a line graph would be really suitable. But we can talk about how, you know, if we were talking about how many pets children have got, that wouldn't necessarily be the most suitable. If we were to look at a pie chart here, that's not really going to show us anything. And we can start to have those discussions with our children so that they can start to choose to represent their data in the best way. I'll come back to here now, and here we go. And just another couple of data handling ideas to show you. These Ben and Carol diagrams have both been created in J2E5. The pictures have been found on a web search in the picture library, and just like I did before, I went on the details button and I made all of these movable so that even in view mode, once I've saved and shared that with my children, they can drag them into the correct place on these diagrams. J2 Office isn't something I've looked at as much in the webinars that we've done so far, but the spreadsheet function is going to be really useful for your maths. Couple of activities we've got here. The first one is just about teaching children to use spreadsheet. So we've been making some Christmas craft fair decorations, and I've just asked the group to record how many decorations they've each made, and I've shown them how to put a formula in which will calculate their total decorations as a group. So we've put equals sum, and then in brackets B3 to B7, which is where that data is, and that will then calculate the total. And we can talk with our children about why that's really useful, as opposed to just, you know, you'll get children that will say, but I can add that up in my head. But actually, if Harry makes a few more and Luke breaks one, then it will change to reflect that, and it will give an accurate total so we can keep track of how many they've made. Equally, within J2E, there are a number of ready-made spreadsheet activities. Now, these will be best found in the upcoming library, which I'll tell you a bit more about shortly. But they are set with formula in there already, so that children can use these spreadsheets to answer certain activities. So here it says, can you spend exactly £1 in the tuck shop? You must buy at least one of each item. And if the children write a number in the number board, so if they write 2 next to the apples, the other boxes will change and their money remaining will go down, so they can work through that activity like that. So watch out for those. Last but not least, a few other ideas that didn't quite fall into those categories. Here in J2E5, I've made a lovely little money sorting activity. So I've just put some pictures of hands and some items with costs attached. And again, coming back to that little details button, each of these coins I made copies just like I did with the pattern, so that children can drag the correct coins onto the hands. to pay for that item. And this is the bin that I was talking about. So this is just a picture of the bin, but using that details button, I turned it into a usable bin. So if children make a mistake, they can drag that and it works as a bin. Again, I've just saved that. I've shared it with my children. They can use it in view mode, but if they click on edit mode, they can save that and I can see what they've done. The next thing, well, the last thing really to show you today, which is probably the most mathsy tool that we have in J2E, is within J2 Blast, and it's TT Blast. Now, the Blast games are really, really popular with children, and this is our times table, competitive game. Children have a choice to practice or to go live against other children in the world and to play and to win against other children in the world. If they go live, it will start them at the earliest level, and it will, it's really clever the way it works, so that as they get better, as they start getting more right, it will move them up the levels and it will remember which level they're on when they come back next time. If they choose to go and have a practice, it will allow them to choose the level, and underneath the level, it tells them which times tables they'll be practicing. So they can answer, and it will move their little rocket, if you look, oh, I've done that wrong, along the bottom if they get it right. Okay. As a teacher, I will show you, there's a really useful thing that you have, which is the ability to see how your children are getting on this pink feedback button. It will show you the scores your children have got and how they've been getting on. And there's also a little printable certificate you can use if your children are doing really well. And lastly, as I briefly mentioned before, to watch out for, we have a new library coming very soon. It will be full of ideas for other activities you can do, not just with your maths, but just using the tools in general. Not only will you be able to find ideas, you'll actually be able to add ideas and resources to the library. So we're hoping it will become a really lovely community space for sharing ideas and resources. Those spreadsheets, some of those spreadsheets will be in there. So watch out for that coming very soon. And lastly, I know that I've gone at a real pace today to get through everything. And as I said, you can go back and watch this webinar in a couple of days, but other ways to access help if you need it. Your first port of call would be the help tile on your Launchpad. In there are lots of articles with photographs, step-by-step instructions. There are videos you can watch all about how to use both the tools and the toolkit as a whole. So if you have a question, that might be your first place to look. Beyond that, as Danny mentioned at the beginning, please do feel free to contact us if you still have any questions. support@j2e.com. We'll get you Sophie. She will be able to answer all your questions. You can also look on our website. And if you're after other ideas, we do have social media presence. So on Twitter and Facebook, schools will often share with us ideas of things they've been doing. So that's another great way of finding out other ideas. And lastly, again, as I said before, please do, if you've enjoyed this, book on. We've got 2 more webinars left. I think the arts is our next one. So if they are of interest to you, if you've enjoyed today, I try not to repeat any activities between webinars. So if you come to another one, hopefully you'll just get lots more ideas to get you started with using J2E. And now I'm going to open it up for questions. So if you want to unmute yourself, that will be okay. If you can turn that on, or if you want to just pop in the chat any questions you have, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you very much for coming today. I hope it's been helpful.
Hi, I'm just wondering, if you've never used J2E at all yet, what would be the best way to get started? Is it just play about with it or check the webinars?
I think, well, you've got different options. There is an a series of introductory webinars. I think there's a couple of different ones, but essentially getting to the same point, there are introductory webinars on the website. So that would be one place to go if you want to know. That will go through things like logging in and the real basics that way. But equally, pick a tool and get started. and have a bit of a play. Maybe start with J2E5. There's lots in there that you can have a look at. And again, go back to that help tile if you just want to find out about a particular tool to get started that way. But I would recommend the introductory webinar as well if you've got a bit of time to watch that and get started. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Something we quite often say is don't be afraid to just pick a tool and have a go, because although the tools are relatively new in Northern Ireland, we've been in existence over 10 years, and we are licensed to all schools in Wales and 98% of schools in London. So there are thousands of schools using these tools day in, day out, and we know from all that experience that when you get the children onto the tools, they find things themselves and they're getting creative, and there's no traps in there. There's nothing to be worried about, because the tools have been carefully designed to be e-safe and to work in your class context. So yeah, just pick one and get started is a great way to start.
Thank you.
I know Charlie's got another meeting in just a moment or two. Sophie and I can stay around a bit longer to answer any questions.
For a few minutes, it's fine.
You're okay for a few minutes, great, okay. So if anyone's got any more questions, don't be shy. Otherwise, grab yourselves cups of tea, and thanks very, very much to everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.